Who is this group from Phoenix? What are they doing? Why are they doing it?
Well, they're following the Texas model, right? So the governor of Texas has successfully captured Fortune 500 headquarters out of California. And, it's sort of a guerrilla tactic where they go in and make a lot of noise. They drive companies that are being impacted by cost or congestion to their site. And then all of those companies will be getting contacted by the governor of Arizona, inviting them to the state. They'll tie it around, NFL football, sports, spring training, create an event around it, and try to accelerate the pulling out of companies out of the Bay Area.
So they're poaching our people and our businesses.
Yeah, Denver's doing it, as well. The governor of Colorado's doing it. Denver's doing it. And, it's been going on a long time in California. And I think from the inland part of the state, the Sacramentos, the Fresnos, the Stocktons, those employers are important to us. And I think it's important that the economic development community in California start to send a message that these employees and employers are an important part of our economy. And, when we lose companies, it does hurt our economy. And the people that are losing their jobs to other states, they have to choose between, living with their families in California or following their job out of state to a place like Texas or to a place like Denver or Arizona.
Mm-hmm. And it's a tough choice to have to make.
It's a tough choice. I think one of the things that's frustrated me in this job, being here a little over 4 years, is we've never considered, this as something that is really a slap in the face to California. I mean, it really is the equivalent of somebody spitting in your face, that they think that you don't have the ability to step up for yourself, that they play on this notion that California is apathetic about businesses being successful. And, they get big accolades back home when they do this. A lot of these attacks are coming from very conservative states like Arizona and Texas. And the people that come in and engage in these tactics get a lot of lift. They use it as fundraising tactics back in their community. And, there's a lot of interest in Texas and seeing California fail. And I think even so in Arizona, quite honestly. So to me, I don't think it's a situation where we should be reacting to every little thing that happens in California, but we should have a strategy on how to send a better message to the businesses in California that they matter to us. And there ought to be a strategy on how to handle and manage this, because even though inside California, we know it's a great state and it's thriving and it has, many assets. If we're not telling that story, you allow the state of Arizona, the state of Texas to tell that story. And those negatives get picked up in the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. I mean, and they stick. I think one of the things that California leadership hasn't really got their head around is these allegations or these exaggerations that are deficiencies as a state, they stick. We travel nationally and people feel like the way San Francisco's impacted, they feel the entire state's impacted like that. So they don't think there's any place in California where you can buy a house anymore. People are always shocked to find out that the minimum housing price in Sacramento is not $1 million. They're shocked to find out that we have short commute times to work, and that they're also shocked to find out that businesses are more successful in California than businesses in Texas. So the narrative on this is we're not a low-cost provider. And we're not going to become a low-cost provider. We don't want to be low-cost providers. Part of our goal in Sacramento is we want our region to move up the food chain with the Aggie Squares of the world, the mobility center, start to be a place of excellence, not a cheap place. I don't think a cheap narrative works for any economy very long. It is a race to the bottom. But we ought to be challenging other states when they come into our state. And we ought to be thinking more in terms of when people say California, there should be two things they should be saying about California from a business standpoint. We're the most productive economy in America. So productivity for companies in California is twice the productivity in Texas. The profitability of California companies, they're staggeringly more profitable than companies in Arizona. So when people talk about California and California businesses, what they ought to be thinking about is how productive our market is, how global our market is and how incredibly profitable it is to build a business in California. And so if we're going to make a premium play, which we should, then we got to back that up with muscle and energy into the message and not let the tax consultants and the site selection consultants and competitor economic development groups that come from states that have zero income taxes, they should not be defining our market reputation on Wall Street and in the Wall Street Journal and in the New York Times. And in fact, they really are. And that's probably the two things that frustrate us the most. One, take a stand for California. You know, when these companies move out, you know, people who live in California will be losing their job. And whether or not the economy replaces it, it doesn't necessarily mean your job gets replaced. So I had an experience about 2 years ago in the Los Angeles airport, and I always tell this story. So I walked in and I was getting waited on by a couple of people who were about my age, and they had USC graduate school MBA program badges on their waiter's gown, you know, and I was getting a hamburger, Rock Bottom Cafe in Los Angeles. Everybody from Sacramento knows that. And I said, "Oh, are you a fan of USC?" Because the person was waiting tables. And she said, "No, I graduated from the USC's MBA program." And she had been an executive at Toyota. And when Toyota moved to Plano, Texas, and pulled out of Los Angeles, she and her husband, who met at Toyota, both had to choose between staying in Los Angeles area, letting their kids finish high school and giving up their job, or going to Texas and keeping their job at Toyota. So in order to allow her children to finish their junior and senior in high school, she and her husband lost their jobs, stayed in the Southern California market, and they were waiting tables at the Los Angeles airport with MBAs from USC in their 50s because they had enough severance and savings to hang on for a couple of years to get their kids out of school. Then they were going to find out what they were going to do next. So I think we have really done a disservice to the families of California who lose their job in these poaching attacks from Texas or Arizona or Utah by saying, "Oh, you know, we're above standing up and fighting for those jobs," or we're too high end to worry about these employers like McKesson moving their headquarters to Dallas, which was the fourth most profitable company in California, by the way. And I think what has happened is we've sent the message to businesses that they don't matter to us. And I think even more painfully, we've sent the message to the California families that will lose their jobs to these outbound business decisions into Denver and Salt Lake and so on and so forth, that their job doesn't matter to us. And as a career economic developer, when we get up and work for our community, the first thing we're working for is the families in our community. You know, the family that doesn't have a job or the family that needs a better job. And that's the entire point of the work. And then the second thing we do is we take a stand for our community and we take a stand for California. And we're proud of what we have to offer businesses, even though, you know, we've got challenges in taxes and regulation, but we do have the best higher education system in the world. You know, we do have the most sophisticated capital market in the world. And quite honestly, we probably have the strongest economy in the world. But when we play softball and everybody else is playing hardball, you know, the message in the marketplace is California's headed for a collapse. It'll never be back again. And I've seen people make light of that, but we shouldn't be making light of that, because I promise you, I saw Warren Buffett in an interview within the last 3 months, and he spoke about California like it wasn't going to be successful into the future. And so when you let this narrative sit out there unchecked, you know, it seeps in deeper than people think. And then two, we send the message that we don't care about businesses leaving the state. That's always a bad strategy. And number three, how would you feel right now if you were being brought into a room in the Bay Area or East Bay and being told, "Hey, listen, you know, we're moving our company to Houston, Texas, and you get to go home and tell your family they get to choose between living in California and starting over for a job, or they got to get up and move to Houston, Texas to keep your job and disrupt your family and disconnect your family from your relatives and your community that you grew up in." So those are sad things and they're negative things. And as a community, as a California community, we need to be much more determined in stopping these things from happening.
So we've had Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Texas, and am I missing one, make a play for our state?
Well, you had Justin Trudeau. You had the Prime Minister from Canada come down to Silicon Valley about 6 months ago. The Mayor of Washington, D.C. led a delegation. I think we tracked, there are 15 states in the United States that in their strategic plan as a state, it includes taking industry out of California. Virginia is another one that does it. North Carolina. We had Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, came in here 4 years ago, trying to convince people in Southern California that the port system in Florida was gaining on us. We did the analogy, the Long Beach port has more economic power than the entire port system in Florida. But we'll let Rick Scott off the hook, so to speak, scot-free for a better term, to make a statement like that without us checking it. So one of the things we're going to do as an organization is, we're going to take everybody head on. If you come into our state, we're going to take you head on, and there'll be paybacks when we get a little bit better and a little bit more up and running as a community. But that's strictly because of our stand for California, our stand for our community, and our stand for the families that'll lose these jobs when they leave. And no matter how well you're doing in California, who wants to lose your job? No one does. So we should be much more intense and much more aggressive about these inbound behaviors.
So which can you give me a list of some businesses that have been successfully poached? You mentioned McKesson, Toyota.
Well, we've actually lost 10% of our Fortune 500 headquarters just in the last 3.5 years. So, and they weren't all as powerful as McKesson, but, you probably, Fortune 500 companies never move their headquarters. So if we've lost 5 or 6 in 4 years, that's a pretty substantial number. And, and I think even more so, this notion of, Apple's going to have 25,000 people working in Austin. So you look at Apple's move into Austin, they put their HQ2 into Austin. It's not that hard to flip a headquarters. It really isn't. You don't have to move thousands of people out of Cupertino to move your headquarters. It's really just a legal classification. So, as Oracle is putting 15,000 jobs in Austin, as these big tech players dig in deeper, Google's gone very big in Denver and Boulder as well as Austin. It's not that much more to move your headquarters out. And that's usually the sign. If you watch the McKesson move to Texas, for 10 years they chipped away. If you look at Toyota, for 10 years they chipped away their location in Los Angeles. Then they finally made the move. Now McKesson's finally made the move. Well, what's it telling us if Apple's putting 23,000 jobs in Austin? Is that the same behavior McKesson was doing 5, 6, 7 years ago? Absolutely. It was the exact same behavior. So we shouldn't be casual about these impacts, and we should be taking bigger stands as a state, and we should be more hard-nosed about it.
Sure. So on more of a social media level with this particular attack in San Francisco from Arizona, what is the strategy to take their narrative, to take their hashtag California struggles and flip it on its head?
I think first off, you always start from a position of abundance. Jim Wonderman, who runs the Bay Area Council, and we were invited by CoreNet to debate a representative from Dallas on the economy. And Jim Wonderman from the Bay Area Council put up the amount of IPOs the Bay Area has had versus the amount of IPOs that Dallas had. And it was embarrassing. You would have thought Dallas was Des Moines, Iowa, compared to the Bay Area. So I think part of it is, I don't know that we necessarily got to react to them, but we need to have a bigger voice about who we are and what we are, and that voice has got to come from Gavin Newsom. That voice can't come from me. We've made 1,100 presentations in the Bay Area. We've been in coordination with the Bay Area Council, and I don't think the governor should respond to Arizona. Maybe the governor of Texas, I would like to see him respond to, but people want to hear from their governor that the economy is a priority, and they want to hear from the governor that I'm going to defend your job. Your job really matters to me, and even if we're going to replace the top line performance of the economy over and over again, that still doesn't change the fact when someone loses their job to an outbound expansion into another state. Now they have to choose between their family and their career, that we're not having California families suffer in those experiences. I think the other thing that's really important is, one of the things we're picking up in Silicon Valley, when these companies move out of California, they're not having as much success as they think they are either. So I think the idea that we've allowed this notion that companies leave California and now they're wildly successful, not necessarily true. A lot of companies have left California, especially at the tech level, gone into Denver, Austin, have struggled to find the talent. They're no longer at Silicon Valley. We always tell everybody when they're leaving the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, I always say, well, that's really bad news. And they said, why is that? I said, you're leaving the most innovative market in the world. Why would you move your business out of the most innovative market in the entire world to go somewhere for housing relief? So there's a lot of ways to manage that argument. And I think, being quiet and not saying anything, isn't the right way to handle it. And I don't necessarily think we've got to lower ourselves to their tactics. But, we look at these tactics as kind of tacky and lowball, but I can tell you they work. And right now, I think in Phoenix, they've had about a third of the companies that locate in Phoenix come out of our state. So we are losing companies. Those companies, should be fought for. If Apple's building 20,000+ jobs in Austin, that's exactly the kind of move a company makes when they start thinking about where they're moving their headquarters next. And, we should be more engaged with our top employers at the state level. I know we're still new in this administration, but, we need to beef up the State Economic Development Group. The governor needs to get out front on these issues better, and we need to, take a stand for the California families that are losing their jobs to these poaching efforts.
Now, you talked about what you would say to these companies. That California has the most productivity and the most profitability for these companies, but as you know, companies also look for quality of life for their employees. And so, it is a fact that cost of living is pretty high in California. I mean, certainly the Bay Area, but like you also said, California is more than just the Bay Area. So what would you say to companies in terms of cost of living and quality of life for its employees?
Yeah, I think first off, I think the quality of life in the Central Valley and in Sacramento is wonderful. One of the things that I think we should be doing a better job of is, I think states' rights are really splitting on things like civil rights and tolerance. And I think bright young people want to live free and free to make choices. And I think California is a place you can guarantee you're going to be free, you're going to be accepted here. You don't have to worry if you're Indian or Sikh or Muslim, and you got to worry about that if you're in Arizona, quite honestly. And you got to worry a lot about that if you're in Texas. And one of the things we're picking up in Silicon Valley is a lot of the tech talent that's been relocated, even to a place like Austin, feels very uncomfortable with the rebel flags and the culture over there. That's not a hospitable place for diversity and tolerance. It just isn't. And we should be jamming them on those issues. It's also not a place that has a lot of expertise on how to disrupt technology. Name a company in Austin. I mean, Austin's done a great job, but I can't think of a company in Austin that's done an IPO that I've heard of. Instagram's not in Austin, it's in California. I haven't heard of Twitter. I haven't heard of LinkedIn. I haven't heard of Uber, Lyft. I haven't seen or heard of any company like that ever coming out of Austin. And there's a special kind of creativity in California that just isn't in those other places. And, as we improve our transit system, 21% of our workforce goes to and from San Francisco. And I think if we improve our transit between Sacramento and San Francisco, we offer people an opportunity to be in Silicon Valley and enjoy their quality of life. Because, it's 72 miles away. And we go down there all the time and meet with venture capitalists and technology accelerators. So we know everybody at Y Combinator, 500 startups, plug and play, and we're still able to have a nice quality of life. So I do think, and I do like what's going on right now at GoBiz, where their leadership is starting to think this way. So I think we're starting to think in the right direction, but we need to execute and we need to move more aggressively in the right direction.
So the average person who sees this story, who is not a business owner and maybe doesn't work for a Fortune 500 company that's in danger of being poached, but does worry about how companies leaving the state will impact them and our tax base and our economy. What can they do? How can they jump in the fray?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, first off, having worked, this is my fourth state I've worked in. And in the other states, the constituency of the state demands more of their government than we do. We do not demand much from this government. I think one of the things that we're trying to do in our own community here in the greater Sacramento area is expect more from your government. We pay a lot of taxes into this government. Our infrastructure ought to be state of the art. Our schools shouldn't be 41 in per pupil spending if we're paying 10, 11, 12, 13% income tax. So I think expecting more and putting more pressure civically on the government to fix our problems and to take more corrective measures on the things that are important to us is one of the things we ought to do. We should, I think one of the things that's hurt California is California has been so successful. It's unimaginable that we won't be successful. And then two, I think it's bred a kind of civic complacency that we've worked very hard in Sacramento to fix. Look at Measure U under Darrell Steinberg's leadership. We did not lose that battle to business as usual. The old special interest groups that ran this city government for decades got beat by the mayor and thoughtful councilmen, but also because there were 44 CEOs on this board that were involved in it. So you got to get involved and you got to show up. Otherwise, your government just gets run by special interest groups and lobbyists. So be more civically active, support your legislators. I think the California legislature is very good. I think they're very smart. I've never met a California legislator that wasn't extremely positive, but they really are overrun by special interest groups, and they don't hear enough from average citizens. So consequently, all the policy conversations in California between the pros, as we say, and that's more, that's less democratic than it should be and less transparent. But we got to call for more transparency. We've got to call for better neighborhoods, and we got to be willing to fight for that. And when you have a legislator that does fight for it, then you got to fight with them. That's an example of what we did with Mayor Steinberg on Measure U. We fought with him, and we won. And who won? The poorest people in our neighborhoods won. So we can right the ship in California. We can address affordable housing and homelessness. I think our schools can be the best in the country. Our higher education system is the best in the country. So we've shown what we can do when we put our mind to it. And I think we've allowed ourselves to be too comfortable with our success, allow our reputation and our weather, carry us forward. We live too much on the legacy of Silicon Valley. And I think there's a lot more we can be doing as citizens to engage our government in a more constructive way.